And so one of the other questions that we always get is an idea of what a project for an intern looks like. And Brittany Zengotita, our next speaker, she was a serve intern and currently she is an AYRU intern in the laboratory of Dr. Mark Sundrud on the Florida campus. And I asked her if she could put together a slideshow showing basically what she's been working on. And she agreed to do this. And I saw her presentation. I think that you guys are going to very much enjoy her project, and it touches on many diseases that unfortunately, affect a lot of people out there. So I hope that you enjoy her presentation. And she's also going to give a little bit of background on her career path and where she's at and where she thinks that she wants to go. So thank you so much, Brittany.
Thank you. So I'll go ahead and share my screen with you guys and just jump right in. So yeah, my name's Brittany. I'm actually a senior studying at the University of Central Florida. I'll be graduating this semester with a degree in biomedical sciences and Latin American studies. And I'm hoping to move on to a PhD in either molecular biology or immunology or a broad biomedical sciences umbrella program. So to jump right in, my project is related to generating a fluorescent fusion protein in T cells using CRISPR. And as Rosie mentioned, I'm working in Dr. Sundrud's lab here in the Florida campus. So to kind of give you guys a broad, you probably want to see this in full view, to give you guys kind of a broad overview of what the lab is working on, kind of accomplishing overall, I'm going to play you the first minute or so or 2 minutes or so of our lab webpage video, if it would like to play. Maybe it would not like to play. Let's, I'm not understanding.
It doesn't want to play?
Yeah, it doesn't want to play, but that's actually okay. I'll just give you guys a kind of verbal overview of what the lab is working on. So basically, and to give you kind of like a big picture, so a lot of autoimmune diseases like Crohn's and various other diseases are usually a main line of treatment for these diseases is to kind of use immunosuppressant therapies. And the problem with that is that completely shuts down the entire immune system. So let's say you're trying to stop immune cells that are being super reactive in your gut. You have to shut down your entire immune system to the point that if you're exposed to a common cold or a virus, that you can't necessarily fight that off properly. So one thing that the lab is trying to accomplish in doing all of the different projects that they're doing is develop better therapies that are better targeted at treating autoimmune diseases without having to shut down your entire immune system. So one place that we like to start with that is better understanding why inflammation is happening, how it's happening. And for my project specifically, I'm focusing on studying T cells in the gut, which are a type of immune cell that do all sorts of important functions, but are also important to inflammation. Now, it's important to kind of understand how I'm going about studying T cells. There's a lot of different things you can do, but the majority of my experiments right now and my summer internship project worked on using CRISPR. So some of you might have an idea of what CRISPR is. It's one of the many tools that we can use to edit genes. But what's cool about CRISPR is it originated actually in bacteria. So the system of CRISPR was developed by bacteria to be able to integrate basically viral DNA parts of it into their genome so that when they're faced with infections again by viruses, they already have basically a jump drive of information for, oh, we've seen this before, this is how we can fight it. And these little pieces of viral DNA are inserted into bacterial DNA through these CRISPR repeats, which you can see here in gray. Now, it's very neat because what we can do is we can take special proteins from bacteria that are able to cut at these very specific repeats, and then we can apply them to human DNA to cut at specific areas in human DNA. And what we can do with that is when we can make these cuts in human DNA, we can make insertions, deletions, and all sorts of cool mutations that are relevant to the experiments that we're trying to accomplish. For my case, I'm interested in inserting a fluorescent protein into a particular protein that is in T cells, which is MDR1. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But GFP is really, really cool. So to give you a background, it's this green fluorescent protein, hence GFP. It looks a lot like this little tube structure in the upper left-hand corner. And we actually get this from jellyfish. So jellyfish naturally produce this, and we've been able to take it from them and use it for several other experiments to create fusion proteins or glowing cells, for example. So this big picture here is actually something that I just did in the lab last week. So this is basically, I took a plasmid with the GFP gene. I basically electrocuted these cells so that the charge on the membrane would flip so that the DNA would actually go in. And these cells will totally take up foreign DNA, express it, and make tons of GFP, and they'll glow green. So this is like a quick example of how we can take GFP from another species and give it to a completely different cell, a mouse cell, for example, to get expression. And we can do this on more specific scales with proteins. So now, how do I use CRISPR to generate GFP fused MDR1? So basically, and I feel like I probably should have inserted the slide up, but I'm using CRISPR to attach GFP to another protein that's in a T cell. So these CRISPR targets, I'm looking at a specific gene, and I'm making this insertion of the GFP gene into the actual protein, the sequence that codes for the protein. So you can see here with CRISPR, we have a Cas9, we have a guide RNA, and this big Cas9 red protein can cut DNA at a specific sequence where the guide tells it to go cut. It'll make the cut, and then we can either insert DNA, which you can see on the right side in red, or we can delete an entire gene out. And doing this is pretty cool because if there's a particular protein that you want to understand its function better, as is my case, we can do this to see where the protein's being expressed, what it might be doing. You can use higher resolution microscopy. You can use a bunch of different methods to study a protein when it's glowing, as opposed to when it's in a cell with a bunch of other things that you can't really differentiate what's what. So now to look at MDR1. So why do I care about MDR1, right? So MDR1 is this protein that's actually expressed in a bunch of different types of cells, but in my case, it's expressed in T cells in the gut, along with a lot of other things. But basically what MDR1 is believed to do right now is it transports molecules out of the cell, predominantly chemo drugs. So let's say there's some type of medicine that you're taking, your cells don't necessarily want to accumulate a ton of that inside of themselves. So they will use MDR1 to pump this stuff out of the cell to avoid it making them sick. And it's kind of like a clothespin. So you can see here, it has this kind of structure, and on the bottom where it's open, it'll kind of pinch to be able to push things up out of it. So one thing that's important to note for my particular project is my lab has found that when cells don't express MDR1, they experience some defects that aren't necessarily super related to drug transport, and they want to understand why those are happening. So for example, the metabolism of some of these T cells kind of gets wonky when they don't have MDR1, and that's not super related to drug transport. So understanding why that's happening, we'd have to first see where else it's being expressed. So my project is to insert this GFP tag, as you can see at the bottom, to the end of this protein so that we can see if it's being expressed anywhere else in the cell outside of where we know it's currently being expressed, which is just the outer cell membrane. So with all that being said, I know that was kind of a lot. What does a day in the lab look like? I'm sure that's what you guys are wondering. So it's pretty fun. One thing that's important to understand is like some days are going to go super awesome and you're going to be like, yes, you know, I can do anything. I can do any experiment on Earth. And then some days are going to be kind of rough. So I have my fun days where like I'm getting my projects done. They're totally working. But then this panel in the middle is an example of just this week. So I was growing up some T cells. I was super excited about this experiment I had going, but T cells are totally not supposed to look like this when you look at them under the microscope. This is a bunch of contamination by bacteria or fungus or anything like that. So you'll have days like that, and that's okay. Because if you love what you're doing, like the fun days will outweigh the rough days, and you have to be okay with like starting over, trying again. And you'll do that whether you're a summer intern, whether you're doing something for the year, you'll have days like this. But for the most part, the little wins, like getting my PCR done, making sure all that, you know, getting to run the gels and seeing that my stuff worked, or looking at cells when they totally do grow up properly, like my green expressing cells. Those really make it worth it. And some of you might be wondering how you come across a research project. So there's a couple things that can happen when you join a lab. You might come in with your own question. If you're super familiar with a faculty member or what they're working on, you might say, hey, I would really like to study this. So you might come in and be able to already jump in. If not, sometimes you can come into a program and your faculty member will give you a specific research question. He'll say, you know, this is what the lab's looking at. This is what we'd like you to look at. And he'll give you like very specific, he or she will give you very specific information on how to do that. Other times, which is a little more relevant to my case, my faculty mentor will kind of tell me about what they're doing, what they're trying to accomplish, and you'll do some reading and some thinking and try to think of ways to answer the question that they're proposing, which I think is a little more fun and kind of makes the learning experience better, because sometimes it's hard to come in with like a question already if you already don't know what's going on. But when you come in with some questions of your own versus also reading and learning versus your mentor gives you some information, it kind of makes it a little more fun. And then finally, kind of like towards the end, so who am I and why do I want to go to graduate school? So I originally wanted to go to med school. I knew I loved research from the beginning. I was totally a science fair nerd, did all that corny stuff. But that's just what I loved. Like I knew I liked research, but I didn't understand going into undergrad that you could do research as a career. I thought medicine was like the closest best option. One thing that I fell in love with the idea of going to grad school is there's tons of career options beyond just going into academia. Like a lot of people think that you get a PhD and you have to go into teaching, but like I learned in the last like year or so that you can go into policy, you can go into industry, you can go into law, you can go into a bunch of things. So it's not even just academia, it's so many different paths you can take. And then another thing that I love about going into research and going into science is that you kind of get a little bit of every career. So you get the independence when you're doing your own experiments, you get teamwork when you're working with your like lab to tackle a question. You get to be creative, you get to problem solve, you get to public speak, you get communication skills, you get to travel, especially if you're going to conferences. You get to teach, especially if you have an undergrad or another, you know, a younger student in your lab, you get to mentor. So you really get kind of a little bit of every career. And I think that's important to remember is like you spend a lot of time at your bench, but you are getting a lot of different experiences all at once. But yeah, that's kind of the end of my talk. That's what I'm working on. It's tons of fun. And yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Thank you. If you have any questions for Brittany, please put them in the Q&A. I'm gonna go all the way to the bottom, see if any of the questions are new. I'm just gonna take one of the questions that are here even before you. So do you think major matters when accepting undergraduates into programs? Would it make a difference if I choose to major in animal behavior or general biology? I personally don't think that they matter as long as you show your passion for science. Anything you want to add, Brittany?
I would say, yeah, as long as you're getting adequate research experience, I think it's great to major with something outside of your field because, I mean, in my personal experience, I feel like picking up a humanities major, number one, taught me to think and write different, but then also you can try different fields of science and decide what you like and don't like. Like you can get all the way through animal sciences and either realize that you love it and want to do it forever or that you don't want to do it anymore. And that's completely okay.
Great. Somebody else is asking for the contact information, I guess, for the grad students and maybe you. So if you're okay, I'll share your contact information later on with the participants.
For sure.
Maybe I'll ask, so there's a question about how do you get a mentor? And this is a question I think at the end, you might have heard that I posted to the grad students. So do you want to tell them a little bit about the mentoring experience?
Yeah, so I can tell you that going into the SURF program at Scripps, my mentor was assigned to me, but I did have some flexibility in picking mentors that I was interested in working with. Typically, for most summer programs, you'll get asked and they'll try to assign a research mentor based on your interest or your experience. And you'll usually have some leeway about who you can list and if they're taking students and if it matches up, but it's like a couple different factors at play. Additionally, too, you can always reach out to faculty and ask them questions, which I feel like helps, especially if you're considering applying for the summer program. Like if you're really betting on getting to work with one faculty member, it'd probably be helpful to find out if they're going to be taking students in the summer. So yeah.
Great. So there's one question here. What was your first research experience like, and when did you know you wanted to study immunology?
This is such a great question because I love talking about this. So my first research experience was actually not with an RAU or a SURF program. So I had gone to a conference with my mom because she's got this like really weird neurodegenerative disease, and they hold a conference for it every year where they talk about like new clinical trials and research and stuff that's going on. And I was like really young, and I met this faculty member from Hopkins that was doing a project that I just thought was like, you know, the bee's knees. It was super cool. And anyway, fast forward, he had told me, I had reached out to him at the conference, and he was like, oh yeah, reach out to me when you're in college, kid, you know, whatever. But this is where communicating with faculty is critical, because I totally emailed him 4 years later, and I was like, you told me to email you when I was in college, and I am now in college. So with that being said, would you ever consider letting me come visit you in the summer for the lab? And he totally did, offered me a paid position to come for the summer outside of like their SURF RU at Hopkins. So that's what I did my first summer, is I studied neurodegenerative disease. Particularly, I did a lot of PCR looking for mutations in different genes. And that's what I did for my first summer. I ended up going into immunology because I got really interested in more of the autoimmune side to this particular disease I was studying. And I actually got even more into it when I joined the lab here at Scripps, because I didn't realize how related kind of immunology was to everything. And I realized that there was just more molecular biology that I liked. I liked the techniques that we used in the lab more. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things where you have to try different research to understand what you like, because I would have never thought, I thought for sure I was going to go into neuroscience. I was a neuroscience major before I switched to biomed. But as you do more research and you get more experience, you realize what you really, really, really like.
Great. So here there's some questions. Maybe it applies more to your SURF application, because for the AYRU we knew you. But what is it like writing about something specific while you might be or not indecisive? And how do you show each program individually that you're interested?
So writing about something that you don't know about is very hard. I can tell you that I'm in that position right now, writing my NSF GRFP, because I'm writing on virology, on like this caterpillar virus. That's like insane. And I'm not a virologist, you know, I'm barely proficient in my field yet, you know? So I think something that'll help you too is if you have free time and you're interested in science, try to read papers early. I feel like it would have been so much better for my development, for learning, for everything if I had read papers earlier, because it's only now that as I'm reading a lot and I'm starting to learn how to critically break these things down and ask questions. So if you're interested in like a particular kind of science, start reading about it. iBiology also has like amazing faculty seminars to just listen to what kind of research people are doing.
You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I just noticed. But and then applying to summer programs, just be honest. I feel like when, you know, I've written all of my personal statements in like pure honesty. I've had people read them and be like, this is trash, and then get into summer programs. But I feel like when you're a little honest, a little unique about like, you know, this is the science I love, this is why I'm passionate, this is how I got to being interested in this science, that always fares well for you. So, you know, always have somebody proofread and don't submit, you know, a Facebook post, but be honest in what you like, because I think where you're meant to match with faculty always works out. Like I ended up here in Dr. Sundrud's lab, and I was like, immunology, sure, but I'm so glad I ended up here. So
great. And I think Vincent mentioned that as well, to be honest when writing. So a few questions that are for you here. How did you find out about Scripps? Did you have prior research experience before, and how does it compare to university research?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So it's really funny. I came across Scripps application on UCF Handshake. So that's like it's like a web page that UCF has to like look for jobs and stuff. And I was looking for a summer job. So I was like, well, can't starve this summer. So let's find something to do. And Scripps was taking students. And I was like, well, it's within Florida. So I wanted to stay for the summer. So I applied here and all that. But in terms of the second half of your question, what was the second half of the question? Because it was good.
How does it compare to university research?
Yes. So one thing that I love about Scripps that I feel like you don't always get at most universities is Scripps is cool. So there's no undergrads here, which is kind of a bummer, but you can go to like any other Scripps faculty or a lab here. Like, let's say there's somebody in building B that knows how to do like this particular experiment, right? And I don't know how to do it, but I have to do it. I can totally just walk over there or send them an email and be like, hey, can you help me do this? And they will totally help you do it. So I feel like as opposed to like big universities where like at UCF, I couldn't do that. I couldn't just go to a faculty and say, can you help me do this? They'd be like, I don't have time for that. So yeah, I feel like everybody's super open here, super helpful, and you can definitely, I feel like it's easier to learn and pick up new skills outside of your discipline, just because everybody's like that.
Great. So the next question is, what's your favorite part about the program so far? And what about something you wish was different?
So my favorite thing I can tell you about the surf program when I was here for the summer was being around other students. I definitely loved that I could meet, because I still talk to my surf friends to this day. We went to Puerto Rico in March before COVID hit. And we just had a group FaceTime call last week. Like, we talk all the time. So you make some amazing friends in STEM while you're here in the summer. And then I would say as a current intern, like, I think what I'm most thankful about is being able to have a project like that I can make actual progress on. Because in the 10 weeks, I think you pick up a lot of skills and you start learning how to think and like how to read. But you can't make a ton of progress on a project in the 10 weeks. But like I said, it's an amazing learning experience. So you should do it if you can. But being here for the semester, I feel like I'm making way more progress. I feel like I have more time to make mistakes and learn from them, as opposed to like, we made this mistake. Like, how are we going to quickly fix this so that I could get something accomplished? Like, I have time to think through what I'm doing and like really plan things out ahead, especially because I'm going to be here for a little bit longer. So that's a big advantage.
I have a question here I really like. Have you learned things during internships, job experiences that you didn't learn in school or in college?
I am going to be so honest with you. I think 80% of everything I have learned in these past 4 years has been in the lab. Like, even right now, I'm taking immunobio right now online, and it is amazing. Like, I just read a paper last week in my immunobio class, and the postdoc that was in the lab that I'm working in right now 2 years ago totally authored on this paper that I was reading in one of my classes. Like, and it makes so much more sense because the science was related, like it's immunology to immunology. So I bet if I was not in the lab right now, like that paper would have been that much harder to read because I'm not familiar with those terms or techniques. So definitely, I think taking any discipline you're in, if you can take a summer to do research or a semester to do research, it will reinforce so much that you learn in the classroom.
Okay. There's another question here about applications, and maybe you can bring some light into this. So I have applied to more than 20 positions, keep getting rejected. How can I make my resumes and application better? I have references, some experience, and an average GPA. What more can I do?
I will tell you, because I was in this boat, and it is a struggle. So I think sometimes when you're not getting seen in the application pool, especially because I'm right there with you with the average GPA, with kind of all that, you kind of have to like shout. And I think that reaching out to the faculty is a good way to shout, like, hey, I love your research. This is super cool. Because they are the same people that, make decisions about who comes for the summer. And you speaking to somebody that you love their research and you're interested and you're passionate about science, like, having these honest conversations, I think, always fares well. Also, don't be afraid to reach out to whoever coordinates these summer programs. Like, hey, I'm going to submit an application. I haven't had a ton of luck with summer research programs in the past. Do you have any recommendations for how I can strengthen my applications? Number one, now you're going to get good advice. But number two, when they see your application again, they remember, oh, this person is really, really interested. They wanted to get in. They spoke to me. And it's little things like that that I think will help you a lot, because sometimes the application process it filters and it's just like that.
This is great advice, thank you. So kind of on that line, when contacting professors, do you want to tell them why you're interested in the lab or the research, or do you simply ask the questions you have and ask if they have time to talk? Should you be asking how to get involved in the initial email?
So I can tell you what's been working for me right now. So because we're in the COVID pandemic, like especially applying for grad schools, I've been trying to meet with faculty virtually. And something that's been helping me a lot is I'll send an email, I'll briefly introduce myself. I'll say, I'm interested in your work. this is a little bit about my experience. Would you be willing to set up a time to Zoom? And so far, I've had like 80% success with faculty being willing to set up Zooms. Don't be afraid to attach your CV too, because some faculty like just won't even respond until they see something that sticks out. But yeah, don't be afraid to ask to Zoom. And if they say they're too busy or whatever, just in the follow-up email, ask your questions. I think it's always better to ask for the Zoom first, because if they just say no, then you can just follow up with your question of emails.
Great. This is very good advice. Thank you. Recent question here. How important do you think it is to be career-oriented during undergrad? I've been hesitant to pursue my dream major due to correlation to the job I'll get. That's the question.
Okay. I mean, I would say, so I think if you're going into research, I'm assuming you have some prospects of a PhD. I'm not sure specifically what the career is, but I would say I think any career can benefit from some time in research. I think just the communication skills you learn and the critical thinking that you learn is just translatable to like any field. I would say though too, I mean, I don't know what major you're in now and what the other major option is, but if you're considering getting a PhD anyway, just major in what you're passionate about, because I think naturally that's going to translate to better grades. It's going to translate to you being able to speak more passionately in your future personal statements and essays and everything. I mean, if you feel like the bachelor's is going to be your terminal degree, that's a little different. But if you know you're going to get another degree after anyways, then I wouldn't sweat it too much. Like if it's the difference between like engineering and English and getting a job right after graduation, I could see where that's concerning. But if it's engineering or English and then a PhD after, not gonna, as long as you can sell the case for what you do your PhD in.
Yeah, the person is sharing a little bit more information that maybe I'm happy to chat with anybody afterwards. So it's biology versus animal behavior. So maybe research will help them define what they like to do in the future.
For sure, especially, I mean, you can do a summer program in biology and then a summer program in something animal behavior. And whatever major you get, the fact that you had research experience in both of those things will help you applying for a PhD in whatever you decide.
So we have a few more minutes with Brittany. If you have your questions for her, please put them in the Q&A. We're about to move on. The person says thank you, by the way, Brittany.
Oh, no worries.
And yes, we'll be sharing the contact information for all the speakers today. And we also are recording, and we will be posting this in YouTube in the next couple of weeks. So I guess the last question is, what else can you do to strengthen the application?
I would say definitely don't be afraid to find a faculty member to read over your statement. Because I think sometimes I think it's not that people's statements aren't good, it's that they're missing pieces that are important to talk about. So don't be afraid to ask someone to look over your statement. Make sure your resume is in good shape. So maybe you don't have any research experience, but like, don't be afraid to flex the things that you do have. Like if you have a ton of volunteer experience, or you did like tech in a lab, or you even mentored, like those are all useful things to put on a resume, even though they're not necessarily research. And if you do have like blemishes in your application that you're worried about, so like if your GPA fares on the lower side, you could also mention in your statement why. Like if you work, like I could tell you, in my experience, like my GPA is not fantastic, but I worked full time every semester in college. So don't be afraid to say, and I understand, my GPA is whatever, but these are the reasons why I'm still passionate about science. And I still want to take the time to commit to science, you know what I mean, for this many weeks through this program.
Well, thank you so much, Brittany. This is fantastic information. I know that the students enjoyed your presentation, and they are also very appreciative of all the advice that you gave. And Dawn might want to say something.
Now, Brittany, that was fantastic, and hopefully the students will be able to see your passion and why you were selected for both the SURF program and the AYRIU program. That's what we mean when we say passion. You can feel it talking to Brittany just on Zoom, and when she submitted her documents, we could see it and feel it in her application. So thank you for that, Brittany. We really appreciate it, and good luck with your research.
Thank you so much, and good luck to you guys too. Yeah, if you have any questions, I'll be around. So thank you so much.
Thank you.